Chapter 19. Some 2 hours later, Damianos noticed the couple standing in the doorway of the restaurant before Malou or the children did.
"Would you excuse me for a moment, Malou? I have to meet someone," he said, rising from his chair.
Malou nodded. A secret rendezvous, is it, Damianos? She teased.
He chuckled. "Something like that, yes. I won't be long," he added, walking toward the foyer of the hotel.
Good to see the children and Malou are enjoying a well-deserved break, Salangi said as Damianos approached the two angels. And you seem to be taking part too, aren't you? Damien rejoined.
"You know cats, agile as they come,"
Damianos replied, smiling. Very good, Damien went on. But now the task is going to be a little more taxing than first expected, and we need you to take Daniel out for a sortie of another kind, Damianos.
"You mean separate him from his mother and siblings?"
Yes, however, we thought it would be better if you did it under the cover of night.
"How's that?"
Damianos asked, somewhat puzzled and a little worried. Let's not go into details, Damianos, not for the moment anyway. Suffice to say that a friend of his father has seen battle in Iran, and Daniel would do well to accompany him for a while.
"It's got something to do with his war games, hasn't it?"
Yes, Damianos, Salangi replied in turn. He's destined to accomplish a lot more than we are even aware of at the moment, and going to war or take up arms should be a choice he makes in full knowledge of the consequences that could befall him if he did.
"All right then. Where do I bring him, and what year?"
When Damianos returned to the table, Malou looked up into their cat's worried face. What was that about? She asked as he sat down.
"Damien and Salangi were here with a message," Damianos replied.
Oh, what about? Why didn't they come sit down with us?
"When we return to the boat, they'll have a chat with you before Daniel leaves."
Daniel? What would God want with him? Malou demanded, thinking the worst obviously.
"Calm down, my dear. Nothing is going to happen to him. You know that as well as I do, but it's time for him to face some reality."
What sort of reality? Damianos didn't have time to answer. Daniel, Gabby and Stefano were coming back to the table. Would it be possible to stay around for a few days, do you think? Stefano asked Damianos, throwing a smile to his mother. I'd like to take Liana on a date, he explained, still smiling. Have you forgotten why we're here? Gabby interjected, visibly incensed by her brother's suggestion. No, Gabby, I've forgotten nothing, but since Damianos, he threw him a glance, is always telling us that time has stood still since we left the house. A day or more over here in this era wouldn't hurt now, would it? No, Stefano, is my answer, Malou interjected adamantly. Damianos has given us a few hours of enjoyment, and now it's time to go back to finding your dad. Besides, since you've now had a taste of what ballroom dancing can do to your love life, Daniel sniggered, you can see what you've learned here when you go home. All right, I know when I'm outnumbered, Stefano replied, shaking his head. Are we returning to the boat then?
Yes, Damianos said, finally opening his mouth. We need to get back before nightfall.
Malou and the children exchanged a quizzical glance before getting to their feet and following their cat out of the restaurant. Malou seemed lost in thought when Gabby asked, What is it, Mum? Did you feel something about Dad? Oh no, it's not that, she replied, but I think we would expect to have another visit from Damien and Salangi tonight. Standing on the sidewalk now, Damianos turned to the little family.
Are we ready? He asked.
Everyone nodded, and in a moment the five of them were flying through space and time, going through a series of images that seemed to have been extracted from an era and a place they couldn't recognize. All right, Nicholas, Gustavo said. What will I have to do? The three of them were still sitting in the living room of Dan's apartment, Dan pondering the suggestion Nicholas had made about his son going to face battle with Gustavo. Are you comfortable with this? He asked his friend. Sure I am, Dan. It's not like I'm going back to another tour of duty. It's only to have a show and tell with your son, isn't it? He shot a glance at Nicholas. It will be a bit more real than show and tell, I'm afraid, Nicholas replied, his hands clasping the knob of his cane. What do you mean? Dan blurted, visibly worried. Well, in order for Daniel, that's your son's name, to understand what he would be facing if he were going into battle, Gustavo will need to revisit a place and time that has left a mark in his mind. You mean the warehouse incident in Tehran? Exactly, Gustavo, Nicholas replied, fixing his gaze on the army man. And I don't know if you have the strength to revisit that hour of your life, do you? Gustavo bent his head and seemed pensive for a moment. Lifting his gaze to Dan, he said, Maybe it's just what I need to do, and maybe it will help me erase that memory from my mind forever. But what if it doesn't? Dan asked. You'll be back to your nightmares and your drinking. It's like sending you to a bar saying you can't drink anything but juice or water. Dan was serious, but Gustavo cracked up laughing. Glad you're comparing me with one of those winos, but when I drank it was to forget, not to get drunk per se. But now it's different. I've got a purpose for going back there. And that's to teach your son a thing or two about killing people." He paused, and that in the end is something I wouldn't want to forget. "Well said, Gustavo," Nicholas declared, rising to his feet. "And now that's settled, you and Daniel will meet near the warehouse tonight." "What about me going with them?" Dan asked. Nicholas shook his head. "No, Dan, this is not a father's job, I'm sorry. Just remember your son will not be hurt, neither will Gustavo, and very soon your family will join you, all safe and sound." The year was 1979. Miami was showing all the signs of a city undergoing changes. The boat was also different, neither old nor new. It had the clean lines of the newer vessels roaming the harbour and being moored at the marina. Landing on the top deck, Stefano immediately noticed that their attire had also returned to jeans, t-shirts and runners, which seemed to please him no end. "Feels definitely better than shirt and tie," he remarked, a broad grin coming across his lips. "Yeah, I'll have to agree with that one," Daniel said, looking down at his t-shirt and again noticing his amulet. "And throughout all the changes, our pendants seem around our necks. Have you noticed that?" "Yes, Daniel, and this is what will keep you safe in all circumstances," everyone heard Damien say from behind them. "Why don't we go below deck and talk about your next step?" he added, smiling to Malou. "Good to see you, Malou," Solangi said as soon as they were all sitting in the small lounge room of the boat. Malou only smiled in reply. She was still wondering what Daniel venturing overnight alone had to do with them finding Dan. "All right then," Damien began. "You're probably wondering why we're here, since you have followed the directions implied in the writings of your book, and that you are now aware of your dad's location and probably approximate time of landing. However, as you now know, there is always a reason for people visiting their past, and in this instance, God has seen fit to give you, Daniel, an opportunity to visit a past you have not had the privilege to know." "Me? Why me?" Daniel erupted, looking at everyone around the table in turn. "You. Because you are an important person in your dad's mind at the moment, and because God has made the decision," he said, smiling. "Perhaps why Stefano nor me would be a better question," Gabby ventured. "Again, Gabby, because God decides and we abide by his decision is the simple answer." "Okay then," Malou interposed. "What is Daniel asked to do?" "Only to follow instructions during a visit of a war-torn city," Damien replied quietly, knowing the impact his answer would have on the family. "Are you saying God wants him to go into battle?" Malou uttered, disbelief written across her face. No, not entirely. He wants Daniel to witness firsthand what he sees on the screen every day while playing with his Xbox." "You mean it?" Daniel exclaimed. "God is sending me into my war games?" "Not games, son," Damien corrected. "Reality is what you are going to face." Silence fell over the family like a pall of foreboding thoughts. "I can't let you do this, Daniel," Malou uttered with all the determination she could muster. "But Mum," Daniel tried arguing. "Listen, Mrs. Politano," Damien interposed. "Your son will not be in any danger. You can rest assured God is watching and will be watching his every move." The quiet and persuasive tone of Damien's voice touched a chord in Malou's heart. She knew she couldn't deny God's decision. "May I go and watch him?" she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Daniel looked up at Damien. He shook his head. "I don't think it would be a good idea, Mrs. Politano. Remember what happened on that road leading out of Sunperk. You and Dan escaped the Messerschmitt's bullets because of Damienos' advanced knowledge. In this particular task, Damienos will need to be looking after your son in the same way, so I think it's best if you stay here until Daniel returns." Malou simply nodded and lay her head on Stefano's shoulder, who had remained utterly silent throughout this conversation. Both he and Gabby were now feeling what they would be sure to feel if their brother decided to enlist and was called into battle. "Hi," Gustavo said when he first saw Daniel standing by the Land Rover and looking a bit disorientated. "I'm Gustavo." The two men shook hands. "Hi, I'm Daniel." He looked down at his boots. "I really don't know," he raised his gaze to Gustavo, "what I'm supposed to do here, wherever here is. Why don't you climb in and I'll explain a little of what I know, okay?" Daniel did and hopped in on the front passenger seat. Once the doors were closed, Gustavo turned his upper body toward Daniel. He too was now a younger man, but he displayed the assertiveness of a man much older than his years. "I've seen a few action already, but this one, or should I say, is going to be a bit different." "Different? How?" Daniel questioned, looking at Gustavo fixedly. "For one thing, my platoon has been ordered to search this warehouse." Gustavo nodded in the direction of a building in the near distance, "and to take down anyone lurking about the place." "Why?" Gustavo chuckled and shook his hand. "If you were ever to enlist, You'd soon learn that a soldier's place is not to ask why and execute orders without question. But that's dumb, Daniel objected. Maybe it is, but in this case I didn't even know why, so I couldn't give you an answer even if I wanted to. Okay then, and what am I supposed to do? Daniel asked again. You just follow me, or follow the orders that are given to you. Clear? Okay then, when do we start?